Sam McKewon is the newsman. Sam McKewon, Omaha World Herald. On the Connor Happer Show on 1620 The Zone.
All right. And we're joined now on the hotline by our good friend, Sam McKewon from the Omaha World Herald. Joins us now on the show. Sam, good afternoon to you. How are you?
Good afternoon. I was trying to get to a spot where I wasn't in the middle, like right next to a lawnmower.
Where are you?
We live near a hospital, and so there's commercial lawnmowers, mowing the lawn outside.
Gotcha.
So it makes that sound that commercial lawnmowers make. Did you ever work at a golf course, Connor?
I never worked at a golf course, but I always wanted to work at a golf course.
Oh, it's basically the best job in the world when you're 18 years old.
It sounds perfect.
Like, other than the hours, because you got to get there early, obviously, like at dawn. But you mow greens and you rake bunkers, and then in the afternoon I would play the course. It was awesome.
It's beautiful.
It's an incredibly good job, and you do a lot of mowing of fairways and rough, and you gotta. It's a loud job because of all the things you got to do. But yeah, this is a pretty easy life.
Well, and you get to be by yourself too. You just kind of get to be out there and in your own thoughts, and put some headphones on or whatever, and that's it.
You do. Now, if you're mowing greens, there's usually two guys mowing each one, or at least there was at the course that I worked at. But I was never quite good enough as a green mower to mow them, because where I worked was Indian Creek, and they use hand mowers. And so the greens were mowed, the width of the mower was a foot and a half or something. So it was real tight, right? So the greens were fast. Other places use a riding mower for their greens, but so yeah, it kind of depended on where it was, but it was basically the best job on the planet for the money that it paid anyway.
Yeah. Getting back to some of that right now. The mowers are out though. It's a sure sign that spring is here, and it is spring game week or Husker games week. Oh, I wanted to go back because we talked about this on Friday on the show, Sam. I mean, there was a lot covered by Matt Rhule when he talked on Thursday about a variety of different topics and in-state recruiting, and it got into some questions of how to build a team or what. There weren't questions about it, but he talked about it. I feel like his mindset on a lot of these things have changed. We've covered that pretty well over the last couple weeks. What did you think of? What was your main takeaway from what Rhule had to say on Thursday as he set the table for what we have coming up this weekend?
So many different things that he talked about. He's going to talk again tomorrow, so I don't know how the on-car is going to go. But
right.
Thursday's presser was really interesting. Obviously he had to unpack the whole thing with the punter, which I thought really gave him some pain. He didn't enjoy having to basically cut that guy because they made a switch in how they're going to do it. Although I approve of what Eckler's doing. That's a tough deal. He didn't know I was going to ask him about the recruiting question, but you could tell he had been thinking about it. And I think part of what he didn't really say in that moment, and maybe because he didn't feel the need to, is Matt Rhule had signed a whole bunch of in-state guys in his first three cycles and really valued the state, and may have actually put the kids in this class in a position to be more noticed because Nebraska was taking so many of these guys, and I think a lot of people respect Rhule. And so, he wasn't going to say that, but I think there's a sense of some schools are coming in and maybe offering these kids before they go to a camp. There might be some frustration with that. He doesn't want people to think that Nebraska doesn't undervalue those players, but at the same time, he said, my job is to win.
Yeah.
And I think that it's now becoming, more abundantly clear that, there needs to be a big season in there. And maybe it's this year, maybe it's next year. I think one of the next 2 years it's gonna pop. It's gonna be good. And I don't know if it's this year. This could be a stepping stone kind of year, and then next year it really takes off and they win 10 or 11. But or maybe it's this year, but I think he understands there's a sense of urgency. And, you know what happens? You start winning some games and you get a taste to win more. And so I think he probably looks back on last season and it kind of scalds him that they lost to Illinois and Iowa the way they did. You know, I'm sure they don't even speak about some of the games this first year because the ways they lost this first year were so ludicrous that, you know, that stuff doesn't happen again. But I think there's a sense of urgency there. I've said this a couple times. I understand why they let go of Ed Foley. I don't know that Ed Foley was the main issue there. You know, I think that they had the wrong long snapper, and maybe there were a few other things. I will say that I think Mike Eckler is a very, very good special teams coach and will do an elite job. So they went and hired the right guy. But I think there's a sense of like Rhule's having to do some hard things in order to put this program in position to win in what I think he would call the hardest league that he's ever coached in collegiately.
Did I hear that right when he was mentioning he was talking about McAllister and you know, how they're going to make the change at punter and do the rugby style and all those things, and he was like, you know, this is just collateral damage of, you know, people like firing people. I heard that and I was kind of like, huh, that's interesting. And so I think that probably goes to your point, and having to do some hard things. With that being said, they made a good hire, and that guy is in charge of what they're going to do, and he has had really nothing but success in his career. And so I think there's some things that maybe feel, I don't know, mildly uncomfortable to him right now that hasn't been his MO throughout his entire career.
Yeah, I think that's the exact way to put it, Connor, is that there's just this is what you do when you're having to put yourself in position to win against really good competition. And, you know, one of the things maybe he learned in Carolina, and this is something we'll talk to maybe about over the summer, is that, you know, he was, in a lot of cases, he was going into an NFL game with just less chess pieces than a lot of the teams they were playing because their quarterback situation was always kind of up in the air. And McCaffrey, their best player, was hurt a lot. And so I'm sure he knows what it's like to go into a game and think, you know, I got my best player's hurt, my quarterback situation is unsettled, and I got to find a way to win a football game. And that's pretty hard when those two things are true. And there's been a couple games since he's been at Nebraska where obviously he didn't have the more talented team, and I think he's had to work through that. I think he's very committed to getting this thing right. I think it's very important, not just for his sense of responsibility for Nebraska, but just his own sense of whatever. So, you know, I think you got to make the decisions you got to make. To me, the Satterfield thing was different. Obviously, that was a change that needed to be made, and quite frankly, could have been made after year one. And I don't think anybody would have batted an eye, or at least I wouldn't have. But the Foley thing, I don't know. Again, that stuff with the kicks and the snaps and whatever, that's hard for Ed Foley to control. And, you know, but Ed Foley's still with the program. I think that's good. Satterfield's still there too. So, you know, he's found a way to keep those guys around.
Why did he go? Why do you think he went to the well of when he was answering your question about in-state recruiting, the Big Ten versus Big 12 thing, and he was not memed or clipped the way he thought he was going to be on that one, but like right. Why do you think he, just to emphasize the fact that, you know, they're in the Big Ten and it's harder than everywhere else from his perspective at this point?
Yeah, I think obviously he wasn't mentioning a specific Big 10, Big 12 school, but Iowa State has 6 commits from the state of Nebraska. Right. Out of those 6, one of those guys wasn't going to come to Nebraska. Doesn't matter what was going to happen. Jet was going somewhere else because they have Dayton Rhule, and Dayton Rhule he's legit. You know, he's grown and he's a different quarterback than he was a year ago. The other guys, in theory, could land at Nebraska, but Nebraska didn't really have the room, and A and B, you know, like the way Nebraska recruits is, if you're interested in us, we're interested in you, but you got to come to a camp. You gotta show us your speed. You have to do the things that we ask because we want to make sure that you're hitting all the verified, so to speak. And I don't know that some of those guys were all that interested in doing that. I still think they were. And Iowa State was willing to come in and offer those guys the way they offered them. I don't know if it frustrates Rhule, but I think what he's saying is that, like, you know, if you're going to come into this league and compete against the teams you're going to compete against, we need to know for sure if you're going to measure up to what we need in terms of your size and your speed. More speed than size. I mean, they'll take a smaller guy, but you've got to have incredible athleticism, and I think that's. And I tell you what, having covered the team and watching a lot of Big Ten football, because I put effort into doing Big Ten stuff, and the league is way better than it was 10 years ago. And I don't think people are there yet. I think a lot of people around here are still conditioned because they watch ESPN a lot, and that's okay. I'm not trying to knock anybody. I'm saying that ESPN has a concerted purpose to make sure that everybody knows that the SEC is the best league, and I don't think that's true anymore. I think there's teams in the SEC that are very, very good and programs that are very good. I don't think that it's better than the Big Ten at this point. I don't. And I watched Illinois play South Carolina, and I watched Michigan play Alabama. And those were not games where the SEC team had more. You know, they got beat. And it might have been true a couple of years ago, but the money is kicked in and the coaching is kicked in, and it's not as simple an equation as it used to be. And I think Rhule knows it because he's been playing these teams, and I think he's trying to tell people, in order to play in the Big Ten, you have to bring certain competitive and athletic qualities to the table, and he's trying to make clear what's really important. And that may be hard for people to hear, but I happen to agree with it. I think he's right.
And it's really informed, I think, the change that and all the changes in college football. When, I don't know if this is fair to characterize it this simply, but like when he got here, Sam, it was, you know, we're going to develop and if you're to boil it down to one thing, it's like, hey, we want to try and be how Michigan created their program. Obviously, there's a lot of talent there, or like in Iowa, but we're going to do it with better quarterback play or something like that. And now on Thursday, he's talking about, look, man, we got to sell out everything. Everything that we do is about beating Ohio State and doing the things that Ohio State does and being like that. Like that is definitely different from what it was 2 years ago.
I think so, and I think it's the right approach. I think you want to make the college football playoff. And a couple of years ago, it was a 4-team event. Hard to make unless you basically go 11-1, and you have to build to that. But I think now, you know, a 10-2 season puts you in contention for the CFP, and 9-3 might do it too. You know, the right 9-3 would also do that, and you know, so I think there's certainly a sense of all around that program is got to get there, got to be in the conversation, got to be in the mix, got to go into the first true road game 5-0. I can't remember where the first true road game's at. Maryland, I don't know. And you gotta beat Michigan. And Michigan comes to town, gotta have a full house, gotta be loud, gotta shove them the way they shove you and beat them. You know, all those things. I think there's a sense of urgency there. And I'm not trying to knock any of Rhule's predecessors per se, but you know, I just don't know if the urgency was always there. I didn't sense that. I think there was there might have been a woe is me thing that kicked in with Frost, and with Riley, I don't know that Riley was attuned to the thing that you needed to be attuned to at Nebraska. Like Riley was used to working at Oregon State, and if he had an 8-win season, everybody kind of looked around and said, "Hey, pretty good," you know, like, "Hey, nice work, Mike." And that's not the way it is at Nebraska. So, you know, you can't let down much. You have to stay on top of everything. And we'll see how it goes. I mean, I think it's a work in progress. I know he likes the team, but they're gonna have to play great. It's not just, oh well, hey, let's play pretty good and we'll roll the ball out and win 10 like it's 1988. That's not how it's going to work anymore. It's going to have to be incredible football to win 10 games. And they can do it. They almost beat Ohio State last year, and then Tennessee rolled into Ohio State in the playoff, you know, and looked all tough and thought they were going to win. And I mean, you want to talk about getting humiliated.
Yep.
And I mean, humiliated. And anybody who watched that game understood the gap between the Big Ten and the SEC had disappeared.
That was worse than what Notre Dame did to Indiana.
No question. No question. And Ohio State has the talent, obviously, but that was a humiliation. And then Ohio State, once it got out of its own way a little bit mentally, then they went out to the Rose Bowl in Oregon, and they humiliated Oregon. And that's when you're like, and here's the difference, Connor. All that stuff happened in December.
Mm.
And what it is the depth. And like Tennessee was worn down. They didn't have a month and a half to recuperate. Oregon had a little bit more time, but they had been through a physical battle all season that they had never experienced. And when they go to the Rose Bowl and all of a sudden everything's on the line, and Ohio State comes out and says, yeah, we're going to be that team today. We're going to be that Ohio State team today. Oregon did not have a response. And the physicality with which the Big Ten plays will now take more of a toll in the playoff era because they're not going to get a month and a half off to recuperate. They're going to have to go back and play 2 weeks later. And that's where you saw the difference. Not with Indiana, but you saw it with Ohio State and Tennessee. Tennessee was not physically prepared to play that kind of football game. And to be very candid, I don't think most SEC teams are. I think maybe Georgia is. I don't know that a lot of the other programs down there, maybe Florida. I like that coach, even though he hasn't won yet a lot. But I don't think a lot of the teams down there are physically prepared for what it's going to take to win a playoff, a 4-game, series of games. And I think the Big Ten has an advantage there. It'll be worth watching.
Sam, by the way, the first true road game is October 11th at Maryland, as you mentioned. Yeah, so they have 5 games before that.
Team might be down. That might be the one team on Nebraska's schedule that if you catch them right, you might be able to go in there and beat them by 21. They're in flux, and we'll see. But every other team on Nebraska's schedule, including Michigan State, don't think Michigan State's going to roll over. My goodness.
Yeah.
They're going to go toe-to-toe with Nebraska for 4 quarters. It's going to be 21-20. Like these teams are good. I'm trying to tell people that. And if Nebraska wins 9 or 10 games next year, I'm telling you, it's a hell of a 9 or 10 win. It's not the same as like 89. It's going to be tough.
Well, and the week after they play Maryland, they go on the road to Minnesota, who you wrote about. I always appreciate your kind of, regional checkups, Iowa, Minnesota, throwing them in there, Wisconsin. What do you think about those guys as you sort of dove into them to start the year?
Minnesota is a 7-8 win team. They have struggled to get beyond that, in part because their quarterback play has been average. I think they had 67 touchdowns and 40 interceptions over the last 4 or 5 years. Nebraska's numbers are worse, but Nebraska's quarterback play hasn't been very good. I think that's an area where Minnesota feels like it's got to get better. Wisconsin, I don't know. I mean, I think Luke Fickell's just about had it with everybody up there. And I think he's trying really hard to flip that thing. And he brought John Gruden in this spring and had him bark at everybody for a day. And they're trying. I think what you're seeing in Wisconsin is the same thing you saw when it went Solich to Callahan. They let go of Chris too soon. And the guy they brought in is not a bad coach, but he's had a hard time, I think, reaching the players. And as a result, they're just sort of treading water. Iowa, I haven't looked into that much, but Iowa's Iowa. And, they'll do what they do. And I know they think they've got better quarterback play, but I haven't seen a lot about it. So Iowa will be next week or the week after.
Excellent. Sam, always appreciate the time. Enjoy your day. Talk to you later.
All right. Take care.
Sam McKewon from the Omaha World Herald. You could check out his little rundown of what Minnesota has to offer right now on the Omaha World Herald. It's good, big picture thoughts. I mean, this is a lot of it's an interesting conversation. Like, because anytime you start to have it, the Big Ten versus the SEC thing, it just becomes it is an almost like uninhabitable conversation. Because you have the SEC people in one corner and they're just like, how could you possibly be watching the football games and think this? And then the Big Ten people are like, well, I'm not going to argue with you, man. Because they're not honks. We don't have any honks.
Honk, honk.
We have no honks.
We're honkless.
The SEC is honkful. They're chock full of honks. They have honk. They're honking all over the place. And all they're talking about is how good their conference is. And the Big Ten's like, sure, whatever. Just get out of my face. I don't want to hear about it.
Is that a lane we could carve for ourselves? Could we be the Big Ten honks?
I don't want to be.
And make money?
I don't think that sounds fun.
You want to make money?
I don't think that sounds fun.
Okay.
Rooting for no.
Purdue.
No. I don't think that sounds very fun. But as Sam mentioned, just look around. I mean, these teams are pretty good. Everybody in the SEC is good too.
Now that everybody can hand someone a bag of cash.
Yeah, I saw that as a comment. Who wrote that in?
Sith Destroyer.
Yeah, Sith Destroyer. It is certainly an odd coincidence that when everyone all of a sudden is allowed to pay players over the table, the SEC falls off. Surely there's nothing to that. Surely.
Seems like a coincidence.
Yeah. I just find the next thing. All right, we'll take a break. I'm sorry to RDJ fan earlier. I teased that we were going to talk about college baseball, and then I let Josh talk about WrestleMania for a couple minutes. Sorry, I forgot about the WrestleMania thing, and we were going to do it there. So let's do the college baseball now. I promise. You have my word.
Whoa.
Next on 1620.